feel like it's a double-edged sword with something like this because this list was really difficult to make and rank, but that also means it's great because I've read a lot of great standalones. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video we are going to be going over my top 10 standalone books, and yes, I put together this list. I always feel like you can use more standalone books in fantasy, and so I put this together. Now I'm continuing to read more books all the time, including standalones, and so this is definitely subject to change. But I put this together a bit ago, and I finally am getting around to filming it. Let's do it and go in here. So rules are we're only doing one book per author because that's just the arbitrary way that I'm doing it. And especially because I've read some authors who have several standalones, it could all be here. So we're going to do it that way with standalones. And then the second thing, which isn't necessarily a rule, is I've done videos about standalones before. I feel like anyone who does that always includes Sanderson, and there's no Sanderson here. It's not to say I don't like Sanderson standalone books. I do, but they don't quite make the cut here, so there won't be any of those here as well. But let's jump in and talk about it. So, coming in at number 10 is Small Gods by Terry Pratchett. Now, I love this book. This is probably my favorite Discworld book that I've read so far. So why so low? Because, well, this really is a standalone out of Discworld, and many of the books in Discworld do function as a standalone. This one in particular does. However, you still get a lot more out of it, I feel, if you've read the other books. There are a lot of running jokes that are funnier when you know it's a running joke versus when you're just having it happen. Now, it's great all on its own. It is also one that I know a lot of people love, and a lot of people aren't a huge fan of either. This one's really focused on religion and comparative religion and philosophy and that kind of thing. And those are topics that I've always interested me in fantasy, and I think Discworld does it in a really interesting way as well here too, with the whole idea of the small gods. And so this is one that won't necessarily be for everyone, but is one that I absolutely loved and I think still is my favorite there. But like I said, I still put it on the list, but with that technicality, that's the fact that it is a standalone, but it could stand alone better, we're going to put it here at number 10. Coming in then at number 9 is Dark Moon by David Gemmell. So I have really enjoyed pretty much everything, actually everything I have read from David Gemmell so far, including the entirety of the Draenei Saga, which I've read at this point. And many of those kind of work, once again, as a standalone, even though they're part of a series. But I didn't include those because of the fact that it is literally part of a series. But that was kind of what David Gemmell did. He just wrote what he wanted to write, and sometimes it ended up fitting in a series, sometimes it didn't. Dark Moon is very specifically a standalone, though. And it's a great one because it really shows what you can do with a shorter book and a standalone book. This sets up a really interesting world with fascinating magic and some huge, like, earth-shattering events with different types of kind of like alien slash fantasy creature kind of feeling kinds of things here. Really deep characters, lots of great action, and just so much going on here in such a short book that definitely deserves its spot here on this list. I definitely recommend checking it out if you're looking for something a little bit different. I still also, it almost gets bonus points because I got this copy used online. It's not in the greatest shape. But when I opened it up and I saw it was signed and it was not advertised as being signed, I had no idea. Considering David Gemmell is no longer with us, that makes it even cooler. So there we have it there at number 9 slot. Then coming in at number 8, we have The Legend of Blackjack by A.R. Witham. And honestly, I feel like this so does deserve this spot here because this is one of those books that I was skeptical about because I remember it was going around, several booktubers, including Andrew, were like really big on it. And I'm like, I don't know, I don't typically like younger reading things all that much. And this is, it's designed for, younger readers there. But this book, just reading it, I've said it before, it just gave me such a sense of nostalgia, even though it was a book that was doing unique things and obviously that I hadn't read before because it did so many things that I enjoyed and that pulled me into fantasy when I was younger, and so it just really accomplished a lot while also being the kind of book that intended for younger readers, does not condescend, doesn't talk down to the reader, and so me as an adult reading it for the first time was still able to really enjoy it. And I loved this book. It's portal fantasy. We're following a young character who goes to Keymark, and they think that he's either a doctor or the return of a long dead folk hero, and kind of adventures ensue. There's so many great things here with all of the different pieces of this just extremely epic fantasy world, and it very much deserves its spot here as well. All right, so next up then we have number, what are we on? That was 10, 9, 8, 7. Number 7. So this one might be slightly controversial because of the fact that it's not higher. But you know, it is what it is. We have The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, of course. And I'm not counting The Lord of the Rings as standalone for the record, even though I know technically, yeah, it is. I'm just not counting it that way, even though I do even have one specific version of it. Yeah, that's where we're going. But I included The Hobbit here. And so I am definitely one that The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, I think, are fantastic. It is something that, you know, for my own specific personal enjoyment, even though rereading as an adult, which I still need to continue. I was doing audio because it had been a while since I'd read the series, and Andy Serkis does a great job narrating. I do definitely appreciate Lord of the Rings more because I found it a little bit boring when I was younger, even though I still enjoyed it. But The Hobbit just it has so much of that feel of a timeless book. It really does stand alone, even though it sets up a lot of stuff that's going to happen into Lord of the Rings in some ways. It also, though, is very different, has a different tone, a different feel, and works super well on its own. It's timeless. It's great. I really loved it the first time I read it. I loved it when I reread it not that long ago. So it definitely goes here. But I ranked a lot of things above it, and it is what it is. So sorry. I'm not going to talk any more about that. I feel like everybody knows. So jumping in then to the next ones with number 6. So number 6 is the only sci-fi book that's on the list here, but I had to include Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Now, I still, every time I talk about this, I recommend people do the audio. I did the audio. It's narrated by Ray Porter, who does a fantastic job. He was one of the first narrators I heard, and is still one of my favorite narrators now that I've listened to a lot more audio. He does a great job, and the production of the audiobook are fantastic. So I've not actually read this physically. Still definitely deserves a spot here because this is one where, for me, it did the great thing that with Banshee can also do it as well. And I just talked about this with Blackjack, actually, if you notice kind of that recurring theme there. But it just captured my imagination and engaged me so much in that sci-fi setting. I was so invested. I enjoyed the way it was written, everything about it. The mission, I felt like it really, really had stakes, which, you know, it's called Project Hail Mary, and that's a very apt name. The stakes are really couldn't be higher, but everything about it just I was so pulled in. I listened to it over a weekend. I could like just not stop listening. I remember my wife happened to just be like walking by and hearing snippets of it, and then she would sit and listen to it too with me because it was just that engaging. Such a fun book. Really, really enjoyed it. Maybe I'll try and read it physically at some point, but I don't know. I loved the audio so much. It was honestly, it's the book that convinced me that audio could work for me was Project Hail Mary, because I had done Wheel of Time on audio, but I'd already done that. So I've read that so many times that I'm like, what's something new? That was the thing. That was the thing that did it. So yeah, really, really enjoyed that book. Then coming in at number 5 here, we have Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. That's right, Andrew. Number 5, Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. A fantastic book that Andrew is completely wrong about not liking nearly as much as me. No, I kid, of course. But this is such an interesting book. And I have the more Christopher Buehlman that I've read, I found that his books are all so different. I feel like a lot of people are finding this out right now because they were expecting The Daughter's War to be just like Black Tongue Thief, and from what I've heard, it's really, really not. And he tends to mix it up, and this is unlike nothing else I've read from him. But this is like part historical fiction, part horror, part fantasy in some ways as well here too. But it is just absolutely wild. It takes place during the Black Plague in Spain, with a disgraced knight who's traveling around, ends up having a young girl join him, and he's trying to get through and survive and keep her safe and just go through this horrific, nightmarish hellscape of the world, not only from the plague, but with demons literally waging war on Earth. Just absolutely wild. and the writing style, uh, the the way that it's just the imagery that's evoked, and having now this nice version too that actually has some illustrations as well. I just enjoyed this immensely. It was disturbing as all heck, but I enjoyed it immensely. And I immediately, this is one where, you know, sometimes you just finish a book and you're like, yeah, that's definitely going in the list. And now I'm making the list, and it was definitely there. All right, so number 4, and I'm still including this because I made this list before certain news came out. So I'm not going to talk about that. We're not going to go into the author at all, but we're just going to talk about the book. And it is what it is at this point. The Ocean at the Lane, The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. So yes, I know I've heard about that. Like I said, I don't know a ton of details. I have not looked into it a crazy amount. I'm also not going to talk about it. However, I love this book. The first time I read this book, I absolutely fell in love. I read it in an afternoon, and I've read it several times since, both physically on audio. I've listened to it, and then with this illustrated version as well. I love this book. It's just one of those books that I know a lot of people also love it as well. I feel like it's you could make the joke did you have a happy childhood, or do you also like the ocean at the end of the lane? Because I feel like that's part of it for sure. But it's a book that just really pulls you in. The imagination in both good and bad ways, and absolutely just has a lot of emotional depth. And exploring somebody who's now an adult, kind of looking back on some traumatic events of their childhood and seeing it, and kind of seeing the different sides of it with some of the fantasy or magical realism or whatever you want to call it, as well as some of like the real world now, understanding a little bit more about what was happening because the character was 7 at the time. So I still love the book a lot, and so it's still on the list. Now we get to the top 3. And the top 3 are just nearly impossible for me to rank. One of them is one that I have been has been my go-to answer as my favorite novel of all time for like so many years, basically since I've read it. It's been my go-to because I'm like, oh, it's this book. What can possibly top this? The other 2 are more recent reads, both of which that I read, and I instantly knew that they were going to be in contention for my favorite novel of all time. And so the top 3, I'm kind of, I know it's a little bit of a cop out, but these aren't necessarily in rank order because it's so hard for me to choose between these books because they're all so phenomenal. So we have The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. We have To Ride Hell's Chasm by Janny Wirtz. And we have The Lions of Almerson by Guy Gabriel Kay. All 3 of these books I could say is my favorite, and I would be happy with that. All 3 of these books are books that I just was completely absorbed into. And Count of Monte Cristo is the one. This was my go-to answer for so many years. I still love this Barnes & Noble version. I always read my Penguin Classics version, which is old and beat up, because I like that particular translation and the footnotes. But I love this beautiful version here. This is the first classic that I really loved, and more than that, because I've had a really hit or miss time with classics. Just a book that, even though there's definitely a lot of things, I always go on a bridge too. There's a lot of things you probably could cut out, but just the overall way the story is told and the journey and everything, it once again, it pulled me in so much. I was so invested, and it's something that I've read many times over the years, and every time I enjoy it more and more. It's both the real world parts of the setting and the timeline mixed in with the story. It's just something that I just absolutely love, and I know I'm always going to love as well. And then we have the 2 newer editions here. So, To Ride Hell's Chasm by Janny Wirtz. I expected to love this because it's Janny Wirtz, and I'd heard a lot about it. But this was just such a phenomenal novel for so many different reasons. This, first of all, in a standalone, the amount of world building, and this isn't the shortest book by any means. This is it's a little over, I guess it's over 600 pages, like 650 pages or so. So it's a pretty decently long book. But the amount of world building that is just fit into here, the amount of lore that fits into here, it's just, there's so much of it, despite the fact that this is an incredibly character-focused story. So it's incredibly character-focused, but there's so much extra stuff in there because Wirtz is just a phenomenal world builder, and the characters are so just, it's easy to get lost in, and the plot is very complex and winding. This is one too where you're at the edge of your seat reading it. The stakes are so high, you don't know what's going to happen. And Wirtz also has said she never does the same ending twice. And the ending here is it's just not what you would expect either. It's very powerful and just has a lot of different facets to it as well. So it's a book that I really enjoyed. I talked about this so much when I first read it, and just could not stop talking and gushing about it. And so it's one that definitely deserved to be on this list as well. And then the most recent edition, The Lions of Our Son by Guy Gavriel Kay, also another one of those times that I just read a book and I just like with all of these, there's just books that I didn't want to end. And this was my first Guy Gavriel Kay novel, and starting off really strong. This is going to be hard to top. I've since read Song for Arbonne, which probably could be on this list if I was allowing more than one per author as well, which Janie Wirtz also has other standalones that could absolutely be on this list as well. And that's where, like, yeah, there's definitely other stuff that could have gone, but I was limiting it to one. And even with limiting it to one per author, trying to pick between those, so difficult. But this book, it's set up, it's kind of in... it has a historical fiction feel because it's using an analog of Spain, and it's setting that as kind of the backdrop, but just then exploring with these characters going on these very powerful arcs. It's funny because I'm such a world building focused reader, but these ones are very very character focused, but both also do a lot of great world building as well. Kay writes with the clashing religions and cultures very, very well, and these characters that aren't really sure where their loyalties should lie. They have a lot of conflicts, but they've become friends, and the story and the tapestry being woven here is just absolutely beautiful. And it's another one that after I read this, I just could not stop talking about it, thinking about it, and all of these books that I mentioned, but especially these top three, are just ones that are never far from my mind, and ones that I just absolutely love. Cannot recommend enough. So there you have it. Those are my top 10 standalone books, and I usually I do like top fantasy, sci-fi. This is everything. Obviously, we've got fantasy mostly, sci-fi, and you could probably call Count of Monte Cristo fantasy or historical fiction, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, they're all fantastic, and I do recommend checking them all out. Let me know what are some of your favorite standalones. They include ones that I have on the list. Are there other standalones that I should absolutely check out because you're just appalled I don't have on my list? Let me know, because I'm always looking for more, and yeah, part of this too, we can always use more standalones, so I'm always happy to add more to my list. That's it for this one, though. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Wizardly Enclave Discord. If you want to chat books, whether any of these books, other books, really anything at all, it's a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.